Okay, as you've just heard, this meeting is being recorded. So we are recording this for YouTube and streaming it to Facebook at Roy Branson Legacy Sabbath School Sessions. We have another place on Facebook called Roy Branson Legacy Sabbath School Links. So some people will join us at this time, but many more will join us subsequently. Welcome to all of you here on Zoom. Welcome to all of those on Facebook, and welcome to all of those on YouTube, all three platforms. This is Luke chapter 2, beginning with verse 41 in the King James Version. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast. And when they had fulfilled the days, as they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew naught of it. But they, supposing him to have been in the company, went a day's journey, and they sought him among their kinsfolk and acquaintance. And when they found him not, they turned back again to Jerusalem, seeking him. And it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. And all that heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. And when they saw him, they were amazed. And his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou thus dealt with us? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee in sorrowing. And he said unto them, How is it that ye sought me? Wist ye not that I must be about my father's business? And they understood not the saying which he spake unto them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and was subject unto them. But his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. So let's begin with prayer. Dear God, we note from this that Jesus matured physically and socially and mentally and spiritually, and we would do the same. And yet, we face some challenges. One of them is that it's not altogether clear to us how to grow in these ways ourselves and how to foster this growth in others. Though there are specialists in education who study this, and we have much to learn from them, and we can be thankful for them. The bigger problem is that we're not always sure what it means to be physically well, or spiritually well, or mentally well, socially well. So that is a little more difficult for us. Help us to learn from Gary today. He has studied this matter and thought about it in college and in graduate school and as a professor, an academic administrator, and a very accomplished researcher. So we have the privilege of learning from him today about learning. Help us to take full advantage of this, we pray in Christ's name, amen. Well, welcome, Gary, once again.
Always great to be here.
And I should say to the other group, to the group as a whole, that you're cutting short the time you have with your own Sabbath school, which is the Jack Provencher Legacy Sabbath School, in order to be with us. And on the one hand, I'm thankful for that. On the other hand, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that. So be sure to express to them our gratitude. So we are looking at chapter 2 in the book, The Idea of an Adventist University, and we're going to look primarily at the first half because we began last time with the second half and worked backward. What happened is that I think that we often begin in the beginning and never get to the end. So I thought, well, let's begin at the end, and maybe that will bring us to the beginning, but it didn't. We started at the end and we stopped about halfway. So now we start at the beginning, and we will proceed there, and hopefully we'll meet where we were last time. I have a general question or two to ask Gary. And the first one is this. When one walks onto an Adventist University campus, should one be aware that it is an Adventist University campus? And if so, how might that awareness be experienced or conveyed?
Wow, that's a great question, but it's not one that I think I know how to answer. In this book, I think I try to address that question to the extent that I do in chapter 6, which concerns campus community, right? So people, I hope, will come on campus and find themselves welcomed and find themselves respected, find themselves included, find themselves treated with curiosity and appreciation. I don't, I guess, think that what I've said in chapter 6, or for that matter in chapter 2, really directly addresses that issue of visitors and how a visitor might experience the campus. But I think that's what I'd like to say. So yes, I hope that a kind of healthy and thriving community life will obtain on an Adventist campus in a way that will be apparent not only to those who are regular members of the campus community, but also to visitors.
I do think that La Sierra University has made its distinctive religious commitments more evident in statues than
Yes.
most other campuses do. And I think Loma Linda has done a fair amount of that, and I think Andrews has. But most
thanks to
Adventist
Alan Collins in all
I'm
three of
sorry?
those cases. Thanks to Alan Collins in all three of those cases, right?
I think that's right. So that's a way of showing it. So an Adventist university is unique, distinctive, or similar to all great universities?
Well, so real world Adventist universities, it seems to me, struggle with resources and political constraints, and the challenges that make higher education, not always easy to mount anywhere. And so I certainly want in this book to argue that Adventist colleges and universities should aspire institutionally to excellence, just as I think individuals should within those communities, and that certainly should be reflected in their curricula, in their research, and so forth. On the other hand, while I hope that would begin to help them move toward being in some interesting ways compatible with, or comparable to rather, the world's leading universities. On the other hand, I think we need to be, first of all, realistic about what the resources and the political constraints and so forth that we confront mean about what we can do in the real world. And also, I think we shouldn't assume necessarily in every case that institutions, including ones that we regard as admirable, are admirable in all respects and emulable in all respects. And, we might find ourselves thinking, for instance, that let's say, even as we ought to value, I really do think we ought to value a research culture. On the other hand, we might wonder whether the publisher parish culture of the best institutions leads sometimes to a level of insecurity and frustration and competition of a kind that's maybe unhealthy. The other things are in principle unhealthy. The competition might or might not be. We might, somebody, and this gets attributed to different people, but somebody famously said, academic politics are so nasty because the stakes are so low. Whatever might be, whoever might have said it, we know that's true. We know that in academic settings there can be genuine nastiness and pettiness, and sometimes that, and I don't think that's any less apparent, and perhaps in some ways it's more apparent at really good institutions. So again, I would hope that we wouldn't just be comparable to those institutions. I hope we would be we'd be welcoming in ways they wouldn't be. So, broadly speaking, I hope we are like those institutions in aspiring to excellence. I hope we don't beat ourselves up with an awareness, by pretending that some things are reasonable expectations when our circumstances make them not so reasonable. I also think, as I suggested earlier in our discussion last week, that excellence needs to be understood to cover a lot of different bases, and certainly doesn't mean that the institution as a whole needs to do everything really, really well, and needs to therefore put tremendous pressure on people to do that. And I hope there are ways in which we're deliberately different from some other institutions, and I would think that would matter, especially as regards the healthiness, the non-toxicity of the kind of campus culture we will, I hope, create.
All right, that's all very helpful. Let me refer to a family in our area who has, now these daughters are well into their adulthood years now, but when they were college students or looking toward being college students, they both had done very well in high school and had the opportunity to go to almost any school they wanted to. One of them went to Harvard. The other one chose to go to Walla Walla. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about how a young person might approach the question as to whether to go to Harvard or to Walla Walla if she has that choice available to her.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. When I was graduating from La Sierra Academy, and I was getting a huge array of application materials from colleges all around the country. I think the only one of those I ever filled out was one for an institution, doesn't matter which one, to which I wanted to submit a phony application on behalf of one of my high school teachers as part of a prank I was playing on him. I just assumed it was obvious I was going to La Sierra, and I didn't seriously think about other institutions at all. I didn't, as far as I can recall, submit a completed application at the undergrad level to any institution other than La Sierra. And it's worth reflecting perhaps a bit on that. The point of this class is not to sort out my own psychological peculiarities, my own biography, but I think I'm sure that had to do with just a sense of what seemed obvious, what was kind of in the air. It's not as if I had no friends who had done quite different things. But certainly that was a kind of natural move from La Sierra Academy, and I'm sure it had to do with the sense that my parents just expected that I was probably going to go to an Adventist institution. Though I have to say, I can't put that expectation entirely on them, because when we lived in North Carolina, when I was much, much younger, my dad just assumed, I remember he said this, that I was going to attend UNC Asheville. So, but probably what that does suggest is a kind of sense that my parents hoped I would be nearby them, and I probably just expected that would be the case too. I think I probably missed out by not exploring some other possibilities. I had a wonderful time in La Sierra, and as I've said, the book is a kind of testament to that. But at the same time, it doesn't follow that it wouldn't have been fruitful to explore and perhaps dive into other possibilities. I don't have anything dogmatic to say to two students with exceptional capacities and different kinds of opportunities in front of them, like the two you've mentioned. I think I want Adventist institutions to be places that will be thoroughly attractive to the best students. I really hope we can offer the kinds of not just welcoming community experiences, but also intellectually challenging opportunities that will make the very best students regard their time as well spent. And that's certainly one of the things I'd like to argue for in this book. That doesn't mean that I think it's clear that for every student that's going to be true now. It's not as if my perhaps utopian ideals have been embraced by everybody enthusiastically. Um, you know, so I want us to do a great job attracting students across the spectrum of preparedness and capacity and so forth. Um, and to kind of take our place there along with the alternatives. I hope we've got something, the community life, the particular kind of integration of faith and learning we offer, along with real intellectual challenge that will over time make what we have to commend to students really worthwhile. But I certainly don't think that that somehow automatically trumps any of the considerations that might prompt people to think about alternatives.
I do think, I think what you're saying is right. I do think that a person making that choice might want to be very upfront about what the options are. That is, if one goes to Walla Walla, one is investing one's life in the Adventist community in a way that one wouldn't do so at Harvard.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think one is anticipating smaller classes, more emphasis upon teaching, and then one would get at a great research university. On the other hand, if one wants to encounter those who are outstanding scholars in their fields, by that I mean the very, very, very top ones, maybe one does go to a research university. My own bias is that one does well to go to a small, excellent liberal arts college for the first 4 years, and then go to research university after that. But to start off in a class at a place where courses have several hundred in them, and they are taught by lecturers who have graduate assistants, and one has very, very little interaction with the professors as such, doesn't appeal to me. Now, I'm not saying that it shouldn't appeal to anybody, but I think a person should be really clear about the choices he or she is making.
Dave, I think that's exactly right, and being explicit and self-aware about these matters is crucial. I would just want to note that while I think what you've said is not at all inaccurate as a characterization of what one might experience a lot of the time as an undergraduate at Harvard, it's probably not fair to suppose that all comparable research institutions feel like that. So in this country, I think Princeton cares much more about undergraduate education than Harvard, and really sees itself as providing just the kind of liberal arts college education you want. It's just that the liberal arts college education is provided by world-class scholars. So I think that's an important thing. And then, of course, we think about places like Oxford and Cambridge, where the lecture courses are not that big, but however big the lecture courses are, you've got small group or one-on-one instruction as something crucial there. So I do think there are research university experiences that are much more personalized and much more supportive of individuals than the kind you've, I think, quite rightly noted wouldn't be ideal for a lot of people.
Well, just to pursue this just a little bit longer, I think what you've said is a good corrective to what I've said, because I don't know that it's absolutely accurate that liberal arts studies at Harvard are as impersonal as I suggested. Okay, mm-hmm. I think that's a good point that you made. I'm happy to hear, though, that Princeton is a very different kind of institution. I did not realize that. And I read earlier this week that Princeton was faster than Harvard in accommodating the new sciences. And one time I read, and I really need to be sure about this, but I believe I did read that at one time Harvard had two different graduations, one for those who were in the real liberal arts, and then another one for those who were in less worthy pursuits, such as chemistry and biology and so forth. Okay. Pardon me?
No, I just didn't know that. That's, yeah.
I think that that's so, and that Princeton was quicker and more effective in putting that kind of distinction aside. Okay. Anything more along these lines before we turn to the book more directly?
No, we're good.
Okay, so let's begin with chapter 2 in the book. And one way to get into it is to note that you talk about different analogies for the student teacher relationship. One of them is to think of the student as a receptacle. Another one is to think of the student as a consumer. Another as a participant and a friend. One does not talk about the teacher as a parent in your book. Neither does one talk about the teacher as an enemy of the student, even though sometimes students feel that they are being treated as though they are enemies of the teacher. So let's go through those one at a time and see what you have to say. What about the idea of a student as a receptacle?
Yeah, so I think that's a way of thinking and talking that can certainly feed our egos when we're teachers, but that doesn't seem very realistic, right? It might be wonderful to think that if we stand up in front of that big lecture hall you imagined and hold forth with oratorical, power, that students are going to look up in awe and absorb what we say, and that they will be shaped by the impress of our minds. And I don't, that's a kind of fantasy that I don't think we should indulge in. It's not helpful for students, first of all, of course, because I think students need to be critically engaged. They can't just be passive, or they're not really learning, because one of the things we want them to learn is to be, critical acquirers of information. And so I think to learn how to think through things is not something they can do there. But also, not only is it not therefore helpful as regards real learning to think in these terms, but it just isn't reality. Right. It's, I think that the student is going to bring his or her own perspective and experience and critical faculties to bear, whether we like it or not. And so, yeah, I don't think we should try to do the kind of teaching that's involved there. But I also think we are going to be sorely disappointed ultimately if we try that.
Yes, sometimes this makes me wince because I know of some excellent lecturers who are almost forbidden to lecture in their courses because there is a more participatory interaction anticipated. And I think it's Michael Sandel at Harvard who has these courses with 800 students who voluntarily take them in the history of ideas. So there is that. Although I must say, he does not merely lecture and then walk off the stage. He gives a lecture and then he asks questions and there is interaction with the students. So I doubt that even he would think of the students as a receptacle. What about the student as a customer or a consumer?
Yeah. So, I think that sometimes those of us in education wince at this language because I think it feels to some of us as if what we're doing when using that language in some way cheapens the value of what we're doing or denies its real importance. And I'm sure we can find ways in which the use of this metaphor turns out to be unhelpful. But I think it's also there is, I think I just want to be to be a contrarian and suggest that there is actually something of real value here. And I try to talk in the book about several ways in which it matters, but I think the thing that's probably most important is that it emphasizes that the student brings to the business of learning, to engagement with the class and with the teacher, a particular set of personal goals and concerns, and that we ought not to assume that we know what those should be, and that the student, again, should be passive, but rather, we should respect the student's capacity to pursue educational options in a way that reflects that. And we should also recognize that whether we like it or not, students have choices, and they're not necessarily going to pursue particular curricula or register for particular classes or attend particular institutions if, in one way or another, those opportunities aren't helpful for them. So I just think it's important to recognize that students are agents, students are critical reflectors, and students have choices.
Okay. Now you also talk about the relationship as that of a friendship. I think there's one between
Partner.
Excuse me, partner.
The other
Yes.
is partner. Yeah.
Okay. There's partners between customer and friend. So we have partner in the middle there. How about commenting on that?
Yeah, sure. So if we recognize that the student is somebody who really is a unique person with her own capacities and agenda and so forth, then we can also see that the student can enter into the process of discovery with us. And I think that's one of the things that's most rewarding, right, for an educator at any level. If I can convey my passion for a subject in a way that draws a student into that passion. So the student comes to share that passion and to pursue the subject independently in light of that passion. Again, not just as an acolyte, but as somebody who really joins me in the business of trying to understand whatever it is I'm doing, whether it's chemistry or psychology or history or whatever. Then I think that's tremendously exciting. And not every student, obviously, is going to want to do that with respect to every discipline. And some students aren't, necessarily going to be interested in doing it at all. And I don't think we need to have any sort of one size fits all model, but I think that we should absolutely be aware of the possibility that this, some students really can be stimulated, can be enabled to learn and grow precisely as co-participants in the process of discovery. That might mean actually doing research, but even when it doesn't mean doing any original research, it can still mean pursuing ideas outside the classroom and coming to understand them better. And I think that's a tremendously exciting aspect of the educational process.
Okay. What's the downside, though, of this, thinking of it in these terms? That is, the student as a partner. Are there any dangers there?
I suppose there are dangers in any context of, I can, it may be that I don't really understand where a student is and perhaps expect too much and then convey disappointment when the student really is just developing as a thinker. That might be unhelpful in that kind of case. I might, really start to think of the student as a fully developed peer, even though the student might be capable of reaching that level. It's probably not where she is yet. And I certainly don't want to impose a kind of weight of expectation that then might drive the student away from learning entirely in that area. So I think we could be concerned about that. Maybe you were thinking of something else, Dave.
Okay, no, that's fine. What about the student as a friend? How's that differ? First of all, how does that differ from the student as a partner? And then what are the nuances of the student being a friend?
Yeah. So I think when I think about the student as a partner, I'm thinking about the student as somebody who joins the faculty member in sharing excitement about an intellectual adventure, and who comes to participate in that intellectual adventure at least as a very informed appropriator of information, but quite possibly as somebody who actually wants to help develop new knowledge, right, as a researcher. And I think we can have that experience with undergrads and not only with grad students. The student as a friend really is, I don't mean to kind of use the word friend in any sort of odd way. The student really can just be a friend. That for me was one of the great aspects of my undergrad experience at La Sierra, And it was tough to replicate in all the other educational settings in which I found myself. I discovered that there were faculty members who really wanted to welcome me into connection with them, and with whom I could spend hours talking about any number of things and really bond in important ways. And that was just valuable for its own sake. Now, it obviously might support the educational process in other ways, but I want to just suggest that in a healthy community, there's going to be that opportunity in some cases for real rich personal connection to emerge. And I think that's something else that we need to be aware of when we think about the kind of educational environment we foster.
Well, following up on what you've just said, it does seem to me partnerships could occur within the classroom or within the laboratory, but a friendship would include interaction outside of the classroom, outside of the laboratory. And so the question I have is, to what degree should professors and students, quote, socialize outside of the academic setting? I remember Jim Walters once going to play tennis with Philip Clayton. And Jim was being a little bit less aggressive than he might otherwise have been, because Philip Clayton was his teacher. No, he wasn't his teacher. He was known as a scholar, of course. But Philip Clayton became quite irritated, according to Jim. He wanted Jim to treat him as he would any other friend and play as vigorously as he has. One time I said to somebody, well, he's a friend of mine. And the person came right back, well, how much time per week do you spend with that person? And I spent very little time with that person. So in that respect, I wasn't a friend. So my question is, should teachers socialize with their students outside of the academic setting? And if they should, to what degree should the administration foster that kind of outside of the class interaction?
Yeah, I mean, I have to report my own experience. I really enjoyed the opportunity to have, interactions with, with faculty members at multiple points that really, certainly weren't limited to dealing with class-related issues, didn't involve people with whom I was then, in particular cases, in class with. To me, that was something that was very valuable to me. It might not be valuable to a number of people, and a number of people might feel awkward. And I obviously don't think that either students or faculty members should find themselves pushed into that kind of situation. I don't think administrators should be involved in telling people that they need to form these kinds of relationships. If they're not organic, I think they're probably not helpful. I'm just reporting that in my own experience, they were among the most valuable aspects of my undergraduate life.
But the administration could say to each professor, we would like you to invite some group of students to your home once a quarter. Would that be pushing too much?
Yeah, I mean and obviously that's quite different from building real friendships. It's certainly laying the groundwork for possibilities that might or might not, actually emerge later. I guess I wouldn't regard that as so obviously a bad thing that I'd protest it, but I'd really like to see that kind of thing be organic. I don't, I mean, look, some faculty members are extroverts and they love holding forth, and it would be delightful for them to have students engage with them in that way. And they feel confident about their ability to manage the spaces they're in and to establish whatever boundaries they need so that they don't feel imposed on. And then you've got other people who are introverts who won't at all feel comfortable in that kind of context, who might really end up feeling imposed on and without really knowing what to do about it and so forth. But so I really don't want to see a one size fits all approach there.
Okay, so we've talked some about receptacle and consumer and partner and friend. How about the teacher as a parent? That's not in your list. What do you think?
Well, that issue is, again, I think, discussed at considerable length in Chapter 6, which concerns the campus community. I can only say that as a student, I certainly wouldn't want a faculty member functioning as a parent in relation to me, if that means, trying proactively and authoritatively to foster my development and tell me what to do. I'd be delighted, on the other hand, if I knew that a teacher I trusted and was close to could be the kind of friend who could provide me with genuine support as I dealt with the kinds of personal issues that a parent might be concerned with. As a faculty member, I certainly don't want to have anything to do with playing that kind of role either. So, I mean, I don't, whether as a student or as a teacher, I just wouldn't find that model remotely appealing.
Here's a question that may not make much sense, and if it doesn't, I will quickly move on to another. But let's think. Here's the question. Let's think of Socrates as a teacher and Jesus as a teacher. Is there anything to be gained by comparing them?
Oh, how interesting. So first of all, I guess we'd have to stop and think about what we'd want to say most about them as teachers. And I'm fairly sure, given both the obviousness of their of teaching as an element of the kind of profile of each of them, and of course of their own cultural importance and the degree to which they've been compared quite explicitly. We think about Oscar Cullmann talking about their attitudes toward death. It seems to me that no, it's not a silly question at all, and I bet that it's been explored. Hasn't been explored by me, so let me stop and think about what I'd want to say there. So, obviously, Socrates has the idea that the truth is something of which, at a deep level, we're already aware, and it needs to be evoked, right? That the right kind of conversation, the right kind of dialogue, the right kind of intellectual challenge can bring out our awareness of truths that in some way we already grasp, but haven't perhaps been consciously committed to. And, that's a very specific conception of what human understanding is like, that's certainly central to the practice of Socrates, that doesn't seem to be there in the case of Jesus, who seems to be working instead within, in general, a kind of shared set of background assumptions on the part of his audience that involves rootedness in the in the Hebrew scriptures, in Israel's religious tradition, and that really provides the setting most of the time. Obviously, we know Jesus engages with some people outside that world, but that's not the most common kind of teaching he's doing. Maybe that's really what Socrates is doing. Maybe that we should understand Socrates in a much more historicist way than he understood himself. But that, if that's right, that's a different matter. Where I guess I see the two as, and so there's a kind of different set of assumptions about how teaching practice works. But it does seem as if there are similarities that are interesting, right? There's a shared interest in story. It seems to me that's there on the part of whether it's Jesus relating parables, or whether it's Socrates, whether reflecting on stories, or of course ending up as a character in story as well. But Plato's really using those narratives to teach, and there's also clearly an appreciation for dialogue, right? So we don't have Socrates sitting at the top of the mountain announcing, Beatitudes or anything of the kind that we find Jesus doing. But on the other hand, despite that difference, Jesus also is engaged in teaching in many cases in a much more direct, one-on-one or small group fashion. And I suppose we see that especially in the fourth gospel, but not only there. And so that dialogical awareness is certainly important, as is the attempt to pick up on where people are and to try to respond to and engage with them in light of that. So, I'd say story and dialogue both seem to me to be important features of the teaching practice of Jesus and Socrates. Are there other ways in which comparisons there might be helpful? I'm sure. That's just what occurs to me off the top of my head.
Thanks. That was sort of a curve, but you hit it out of the ballpark. Thank you very much. Now, Bob Ford has written a question on the chat.
Okay.
Bob, do you want to articulate it?
Well, I suppose I was just wondering about you were using various terms for teacher-student relationships. What about mentor or the student as a disciple? And the apostle-disciple relationships. I can remember working in West Africa among imams, and it was very typical in the Muslim community. So an imam, a teacher, gets a series of students that follow him, and they learn from him as that kind of disciple-apostle relationship. Is that an appropriate one for learning in a university setting? Is it ever appropriate, or does it get into the area of indoctrination? And maybe indoctrination is not good learning. I just want to hear what you have to say about that.
Sure. Thanks, Bob, for that example. So mentoring, I think, is absolutely part of good teaching. And I think mentoring is an aspect of what I have in mind when I talk about the student as partner, right? That is, when I think about the student as partner, as I've said, I'm saying that this is a metaphor that, or maybe not even a metaphor, but just an abstract category that's helpful here, in connection with the use of which we think of the student as being invited along on the intellectual adventure that the teacher is on. And so unavoidably, that involves mentoring, right? It involves presenting information, but also involves helping the student to enter a pre-existing conversation and indeed a pre-existing craft. And so that involves modeling good work of one kind or another, explaining the ins and outs of the discipline, its folk ways, and so forth. And so I think in that sense, mentoring, providing guidance to someone who wants to be a part of the conversation and a part of the discipline, I think that's absolutely part of good education. My own view is that it's really unhelpful for a teacher to seek disciples. I think that the best teachers recognize that their students are going to see things differently because of being their students, but that they're not going to agree, they're not going to always share their views, and they're not going to expect that, and they're not going to feel disappointed when that doesn't happen. So I think a good teacher is going to encourage people to engage and to be part of a conversation. And as I've said before, at least for some people, part of a discipline, part of a craft. I think you can absolutely do that without expecting that students are going to take up the same standpoint that you do. I think the practical effect of thinking that students are going to take up your point of view will be that, first of all, you get disappointed when they don't, and perhaps even resentful, and that you may, exclude possibilities from their early educational experiences that might be beneficial because those might tug them in different directions. In other words, of course, it's reasonable to say, I represent an idiosyncratic minority view in this discipline, and I'm going to actively encourage you to think about what that minority tradition looks like. But if you say, therefore, if I find you reading so-and-so who's not part of that minority tradition, I'm going to look askance at you and suggest that perhaps you and I don't need to spend as much time together, I think that's silly and unhelpful. sometimes teachers are deeply charismatic people, and they can use that charisma to mobilize groups of students, and then the groups of students themselves can serve to kind of impose a kind of orthodoxy on each other. I think to encourage that kind of arrangement is really profoundly unhelpful as regards the development of students as creative contributors to intellectual life, or just as developing humans who need to be able to think for themselves. So mentors, absolutely. Charismatic gurus with disciples, I hope not.
You want to respond to that, Bob?
No, that's good. Yeah, because I think one of the things you're trying to get at is how do you develop critical thinking? And critical thinking sometimes means disagreeing with your mentor.
Exactly.
And if that can't happen, not good education is going to occur. That's just, I think that's fairly obvious. Yeah.
Completely agreed, Bob. And I think about the people who formally, let's say in one way or another, have mentored me from undergraduate experiences to graduate school to a doctoral study, and then even in law school. And I think all of those people, if they actually, read everything I said, would find all sorts of things to disagree with. But that hasn't kept them from being very supportive of me, and I really appreciate that.
I think Bob has raised a very, very important question about discipleship, and I'd like to linger a little longer on that. I'm glad Bob brought it up because it has to do with something that happened where I taught for a number of years. When I first went there, there were 2 or 3 professors in the School of Religion that had an overwhelmingly significant impact. And that was positive in many ways. However, it had some downsides. And one of them, well, let me just back off and say, I think that happened for at least 3 reasons. One, these people were extraordinarily gifted. And when I go back and read now what they wrote then, it would be challenging to many faculty members now. They are not anywhere near where those people were so long ago, okay? That's one factor. Secondly, I think what they said matched very closely the needs of the students at that time. We had students who were coming up from very strict, almost fundamentalist backgrounds, and these teachers enabled them to be Adventists without being fundamentalists, and that was very good as well. But there was a third factor that people don't mention as often, and that is these people had the opportunity to have a group of students for the whole year. Now, if one has students from fall quarter, winter quarter, spring quarter, and they're taking no other classes in religion, that gives one an opportunity to have an impact that one otherwise wouldn't have. Okay, when we decided to review and revise the religion curriculum, we said we're no longer going to allow that to happen. Because one of the problems with it is that people became disciples, and when they went out to the local churches, they often sat in the pews and measured what was going on in their congregations by what they had been taught in school and by what they were learning on the tapes they heard the night before. And they were, some of them were gracious about this, some of them were not. Some of them were arrogant and made look down at people who had different points of view, and really made congregational life difficult, and pastoral leadership so as well. So we said, no more disciples. Okay, and we devised a religion curriculum that made sure that everybody took courses from a wide variety of teachers in a wide variety of specialties. I thought that was a good idea, and on balance, I still think it was a good idea, but we have failed to have the formative impact on students that occurred in those years. That is, the students don't leave with a clear and workable alternative in a kind of coherent and synthetic way that they did under the old regime. And I've begun to wonder if maybe the pendulum should swing back a little more to the middle. But I'm not prepared to think that we should have disciples in the sense that we once did. You want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, am I getting an echo here? Yeah,
I don't think so. No.
Okay, so, I think that I'm really tugged in two directions there, because it does really seem to me that the world you describe was a world in which something intellectually revolutionary happened for students who paid attention, and the concentrated engagement that they will have had with gifted teachers cannot but have made a profound impact on them and through them on, as you note, their congregations. I'm really uncomfortable, as I said before, with anything like deliberate discipleship on the part of, as a model for student-teacher relations. And I'm really uncomfortable with the idea that, students themselves might kind of, enforce a sort of orthodoxy on each other as acolytes of particular teachers. What that'll mean for institutional design, for things like curricular design, I'd have to think a bit more. I might want to give students who really wanted to dive in and have those kinds of sustained experiences opportunities to have them without requiring that, as was once the case, or without precluding it, as I think is right now the case. I don't know. I haven't thought through this at all. Haven't grappled with this particular question. I just think we lose something when there's a culture of uniformity and enforcement of ideas, and when students even get kind of subtle social pressure suggesting that they should embrace the ideas of charismatic, figures in the classroom. On the other hand, I certainly want to give students the opportunity to develop, at least if they're looking for them, comprehensive perspectives that they can bring to bear on faith and life. So, yeah, I think I share your what I take to be the puzzlement and the tension that you're experiencing as you think about this.
Well, we went from a situation in which students in that school could take any religion course they wanted to just the opposite, such that every course was mandated. And I wonder if that didn't go too far. Maybe we should have had courses mandated in the first year of their study of professional school, mandated courses in the first year, but then in the second year, have it open to electives and allow people to go where they want. As a matter of fact, what happened is that incrementally, bit by bit, by administrative decision, other alternatives were open. And so in the long run, the curriculum was not quite as tight as it was for a number of years, but then there was no coherence to the exceptions to the curriculum that were made, other than the students' desires. And often those student desires were well put, and it was good to accommodate them, but sometimes I did not think they were as well as advised as they could have been. In any case, it's finding the right balance between required religion courses and elective religion courses has not been altogether easy where I taught, and I suspect it will continue to be a challenge, which brings us back to your chapter and the question of liberal arts, and to what degree these should be mandated and to what degree there should be free electives. You talk about both of those things in your book. do you want to talk about to what degree there should be requirements in undergraduate schools, and should those requirements include religion courses in Adventist settings, and to what degree there should be more of a cafeteria style?
Right. So it's important to distinguish between three different kinds of, or four different kinds of, possibilities that students might confront. Right. So there are, major requirements, which might or might not be specific classes or might be class clusters. So in, obviously in our world, everybody does a major. Then as regards general education, we can imagine three kinds of possibilities, right? A situation in which students are meeting general education requirements by taking specific assigned classes that everyone completes. Typically, one supposes interdisciplinary courses, versus a case in which there's a sort of cafeteria model in which students pick from categories that are predefined, but have considerable flexibility as regards those categories. And then finally, really outside the realm of general education, free electives are just, of course, the classes that are left over that, in virtue of which a student meets no requirement whatsoever, just needs to complete a certain number of units. I don't for a moment suppose that every institution or every student will want the same mix of these things. In my own case, it was a great opportunity. I enjoyed the opportunity tremendously as an undergraduate to take really kind of the minimum number of major classes possible and to just surf around the curriculum, taking as many different things as I could in different areas. I really enjoyed that. On the other hand, I'm quite certain that there are people for whom there's something really stimulating about being immersed in in an interdisciplinary core, as certainly has been true at La Sierra, first with what was called interdisciplinary studies, and then more recently with honors, both specialty programs, and which has also then been drawn on as a model for the current general education program that we've got. My own bias is that different students will thrive in response to different kinds of general education opportunities. And I'd really like to see students given the chance to opt either for quite flexible models, like the one that was really in place for most students when I was an undergraduate, and I'd like to see students given the opportunity then also to explore the kinds of possibilities that an integrated interdisciplinary curriculum offers. In either case, I'd want to stress, because you mentioned this, of course I think that an Adventist institution should invite people to think about issues related to Christian belief and practice in the course of those. And I think that ought to happen in several different ways, right? That is, it ought to happen by way of the delivery of specialty religion courses. And while I'd want people free to select those courses, I certainly think that they want to select some such courses. I think that's part of the educational experience we want to offer. On the other hand, though, we can't for a moment imagine that that's where the business of integrating faith and learning in the curriculum stops. And whether we're talking about graduate professional programs or we're talking about undergraduate liberal arts programs, either way, we need to ask the question how in individual classes and degree programs, students can discover, courtesy not of religion professors, but of specialists in the various disciplines, what it looks like to integrate faith and learning in those contexts. I don't for a moment think that that's easy. I've been involved in efforts over time to think about that, and it's, I think it's always a challenge, but if we're going to say that we care about integrating Christian perspectives into the curriculum, those can't stop with some finite number of religion courses. We have to try to show students what it looks like to take those issues of Christian faith and practice seriously in relation to chemistry or biology or psychology or accounting. And there's no simple formula, but I think we can't forget about the need to do that. So my bias, interdisciplinary courses for the students who thrive on those, greater flexibility for students who thrive on that kind of flexibility, for all students religion courses, and for all students religion integration in a variety of disciplines.
Okay, we're almost out of time for this part of the discussion, but I would like to touch on two different issues before we close. One of them is very concrete and mundane and sort of earthy. The other is lofty, I think, and where I would like to end, and that is the more mundane one has to do with assessment and learning objectives and so forth. And it was my impression, though I might have been mistaken, that more and more of our time as teachers was being given over to that sort of thing. And I wasn't certain that all of it was entirely extremely valuable. Do you want to comment on that at all?
Sure. I think that, as you noted when we talked about this in the past, I think it's easy to understand. I think we can be empathetic when reflecting on this. It's easy to understand why accrediting bodies have increasingly stressed this kind of thing. Um, the worry, of course, is that students are going to be unable really to tell over the short term whether they're getting something of benefit. And so they're not going to be able on their own to make selections of curricula and programs based on this. And so then, when grant awarding bodies or government entities offering loans put money into programs, maybe in fact they're just wasting that money because students aren't in fact getting anything of value. And we certainly know that there are programs which seem happy to take money from students and then leave them out to dry. And so I think these are real concerns that we ought to take seriously, and we ought to think about how institutionally to provide students with good information about the value of what they're getting, objective information about what they're getting, and to use the information we gain to improve our program. So I think at that level of abstraction, what's going on with respect to assessment, or as the ACSB likes to put it, assurance of learning. I think we obviously have to think about that as important as part of what it is to serve our students. What we can't do, I think, is to get caught up in a kind of bureaucratic nightmare in which we spend more and more of our time focusing on these matters. I always used to quip that a student government is an organization whose purpose is the revision of its constitution. And I think I worry that, a university is going to become an institution whose purpose is the assessment of its programs. I mean, I think that's not right. I don't think that's what we're here to do as teachers or as students. And we really need to find ways to cabin the demands that are placed on people's time and energy and thought in this regard, and not just individuals, but on the institution as a whole, so that we don't find ourselves just kind of pressing institutions or pressing departments and schools and individuals to participate more and more in things just on a kind of pro forma basis. The reality is that higher education is an enterprise with a developed tradition of practice that in something like a recognizable way goes back, roughly 1,000 years. I think it would be bizarre to suppose that only the recent discovery of certain kinds of assessment techniques has ensured that higher education is a viable enterprise.
Right. I guess in some olden days, students paid per course, and if the course wasn't going well, they didn't attend, they didn't pay.
That's
so
correct.
It's
Yeah.
that was a rather. Now, this next thing, I think I read in your chapter. I'm quite confident I did, but if you didn't, pretend you did. It's
Okay.
because I think it's a good idea, and that is, I think somewhere you say something like this: the closer our scholarship comes to include the question of God, the more we will be interested in interdisciplinary studies and seeing connections between the different lines of inquiry. Did you say something like that? And if you did, would you like to say more?
So I certainly said, I can be sure about this, that belief in God, our transcendent creator, ought to be a reason to try to see the world whole. And so I think that is real. It's important. A Christian university, and so by implication an Adventist one, should be, in that sense at least, a university. Now, that doesn't mean that at any given moment we can try to impose uniformity of perspective or uniformity of kind of research objective or anything like that across a complex institution. We thrive, I think, as an institution when different people pursue different concerns in different ways. But I think at the same time, we should always be aware, whatever we're doing as researchers and as teachers, that even if the unity we see isn't the same as the unity somebody else does, and even if we can't in the moment discern that unity at all, we ought to keep pursuing the truth in a way that is not oblivious to the reality of that unity, and to try to treat that as an ongoing background presupposition of what we do.
Which includes not protecting religion from the scrutiny of other disciplines, I presume.
Yes, and the reverse.
Yes.
And then I think that's really important. I don't think we should, whether we're, theologians or philosophers, isn't really the point here. It's not just about preserving disciplinary silos for us, but also just recognizing, yes, absolutely, the historian and the biologist and the physicist and the psychologist all have something to say to the theologian or the church historian or the practitioner of biblical studies. On the other hand, absolutely, I want to make sure the reverse is true, that there aren't silos on the other side either, and that critical reflection on the part of the theologian or the ethicist is very much accepted as a live possibility with respect to the work of people in those other disciplines.
Thank you very much. It's time for us to take a break. And when we come back, the first thing we'll do is to see if people have questions or comments. When that is exhausted, I have brought with me a number of quotations from the writings of Alfred North Whitehead on education. And I'd like to read some of those to you and see what your reaction is, both positive and negative. The first one in this list is the following. Whitehead said, "It is more important that a proposition be interesting than that it be true." So let's think about that during the break, and we'll come back to that question. It's more important that a proposition be interesting than that it be true. Okay, that's that. Bronwyn has one announcement, I think, before we separate.
Yes, I do. Forrest learned this week that if you are on any MailChimp list and you take yourself off it, and if you're on another list, you'll be taken off everything. So that may be what has been happening to some people who find themselves not getting emails. So if you take yourself off a MailChimp list and you're on more than one, you're taking yourself off everything. And that might solve some of our problems. Okay,
thank you for that. Just a word about Forrest. He missed last week and he missed this week. It's not as though he has abandoned us, but last week he was away and today he's not feeling as well as he would prefer to feel. So we anticipate that he'll be back next week and continue as usual. So it's now about 11:40. Let's reconvene in 10 minutes.
If you have any questions, please raise your hand and I will compile a list. For those of you who are not sure how to do that, if you have the latest Zoom, there, if you go right, put your cursor right down to the bottom, under reactions, it used to be in a different place. Now the hand to put your hand up has got, it says raise hand. There are 3 lines of reactions. So that might help some people who've had questions about that.
Okay, now it's a little later, 11:41 or 11:42. So 10 minutes from now, let's reconvene and have questions, comments, and then Gary's observations on what Alfred North Whitehead had to say on all of this. Thank you.